That's one way you can avoid losing your tools. Engrave your name into them. But you say you haven't got an engraving tool. Well, that's rough. Still, you could etch it with strong acid, but the acid is so strong that it could etch holes in you, so don't use that. It's too dangerous. You can, however, etch your name, at least into iron tools, with this stuff. And it's good. It's copper sulfate, and although it's mildly poisonous, it's so safe it's sold in gardening stores because you put it on certain plants. And if you add it to water, you don't need very much. In fact, that's going to be oodles more than I need. It's the copper sulfate crystals dissolved in a bit of water. In fact, I've put more crystals than will dissolve so that the water, which has gone a bright blue, has as much copper sulfate as it will hold. And that's my etching liquid. Very safe. Well, how do we go about it? First of all, prepare the tool. I'm going to prepare a steel or iron chisel here. Make sure it's absolutely clean. Get all the fat and the grease and everything like that off. And a bit of steel will also cut off any varnish that might be there to protect it. So there's just naked iron or steel sitting there. The next thing you have to do is to work out what you'll write with. Although a pen may work, it might react with the copper sulfate. So I've trimmed a brush here to a very fine point. Cut half the bristles out and you can see it's very fine. Fine enough to write a clear line. Well, now I begin. Dip that in the copper sulfate and make sure it's not too full of it, otherwise it'll splodge on the work. Just leave the bristles wet and begin to write. And I'm going to put my name. Here we go. Rob. You notice that it pulls away from the metal a bit, but after a while sits there and starts going brown. And when it does that, it means that it's reacting with the iron's being chewed out, and copper is forming, and that's what the brown is. So here we go. And there we are, that's finished. You can see the entire name is now appearing as sort of rusty red. That's copper forming. Now I don't really want the copper, I want the etched metal underneath. But I wouldn't wipe that off. If you do, you'll smear copper sulfate all over the iron and destroy the work. So wash it off, either under a tap or, if you're imprisoned like me here, in water. That gets rid of the copper sulfate, and now you can work on the blade. You'll see that as I wipe that down, most of the copper will come away, and I've got a sort of name left there. If you want to get the last bits of copper out, go back to your steel wool and rub it down, and it won't take the name off because it's etched into the steel. And that's good because it'll withstand all sorts of work. Well, there we are. If I turn that round, you can see there's my name cut into the iron. It'll stay that way for many years. In fact, my old trusty penknife here has had the works, and you can see that it's really lasting up very well. Well, that's okay as long as you've got a steady hand and you can wield a paintbrush, but you might want to do it more neatly than that. So here's another way. Get the work, make sure it's clean as before, and spray it or paint it with some terps-based paint, not water paint. Here goes. Make it a fairly thin layer, and then you'll have to wait until that's dried enough to be sticky to the touch, but not enough to flow when you do things to it. We'll have to let that go for a bit. Now I've already done that, so let's see how this one is going. First of all, yes, it's sticky to touch, and yes, I can make a mark through to the steel. Well, let's put it flat, and once again, with a chisel point, which I've made out of a match, write my name. And you'll see it's a more controlled name. Here we go. R-O-B. Now here's the theory. When you put the copper sulfate onto that, you can be fairly sort of rough with it because it can't get through the paint. That repels water and therefore copper sulfate. But it will go through the scratches. And because you've controlled the scratches, it should give you a nice fine deposit of copper. And in fact, I can see that beginning to react already with the stuff under the paint, the iron under the paint. Well, that takes a while to react. So I'm going to put it to one side, but all you'd have to do would be to wash it off with water, clean it off with terps, and up would come your finished article. And this is what that would look like. You see, it's rather a better finish. It's a much cleaner line. Good for decorative work, and good when you've got a really nice tool that you want to give a clean name to. So there you are. You can copper sulfate etch even if you don't have an etching tool.